All right, in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating some of the alpha plugins for ChatGPT. So a bit of context for individuals that are curious, because I'm sure many are. How do you get access to this? So the way I got access is I made a request about a month ago when GPT-4 came out. I requested access to the GPT-4 API. I requested access to use the plugins. I requested access to develop plugins, being a developer. And so I sent several form submissions, and the lead time, I don't know if they're just rolling it out through the list bit by bit or if it's going in batches right now. But I got access on the weekend, I believe, at some point when I noticed that these were available. So I'm just going to cover a handful of quick examples. I'm going to go through a series of tests for the web browsing. I'm going to go through what I consider an easy task, and then ones that are maybe a bit more intermediate, and then advanced potentially in terms of how it could potentially handle it. So the first thing that I just wanted to demonstrate is asking it a simple question that would need to gather information from today. So what do I mean by that? So I'm just simply asking what is the weather? So if I say, what is the weather? So because LLMs, they're trained on data sets that have a lag, that's the really interesting part with tying in these LLMs with the ability to browse the internet is all of a sudden, instead of having data that was trained in 2021, you can have that corpus of data, but then also reference pieces from the internet if your query requires it. So as you see here, I've noticed this a fair bit, is even if you ask something pretty seemingly specific, you'll see that it's asking questions, quite a few questions, and checking on various web pages. And often it's checking the same web pages, and you'll see it's just sort of hopping back and forth through different, and sometimes the same, sometimes not available websites. And then ultimately it somehow landed in San Antonio, Texas. So I'm not based out of San Antonio. Maybe the server is. I'm not sure if anyone's dived into that aspect of why it would assume that as the location. But let's just say I'm getting a bit more specific. So if I say, what is the weather near where I'm located in Toronto? Is the weather rather in Toronto? And I'll just ask it here. So there are some nice things. So as you saw, when you expand this tab here, you can open the links as they go through. But sometimes there are errors. It would be nice if I could click something here to see what that error is. And then sometimes there are some very seemingly redundant, like going back to last page, commands. Like sometimes I've noticed it will just say scrolling, and it will fill the screen with scrolling on a page that really shouldn't require seconds, and like 30 seconds of scrolling, for instance. So again, now if I just go back, okay, so here is the weather, and that's accurate. So that's a more succinct, what I'd sort of hope that this final product or version of this product would be released to the wider public, would give as an answer. So now another question and use case that I thought about is what I've noticed with using ChatGPT and just the API for the models is sometimes it doesn't give me correct information in a coding context. So an example of that is when there are breaking changes within libraries or dependencies of libraries. Sometimes it will tell you to do something in a particular way, and it doesn't know the version that you're working on if it's newer than what the LLM was trained on. So I've made a handful of videos on LangChain recently. So just to demonstrate it with LangChain, and in this one, I'll show you with the GPT-4 example. I'll say, what are the newest features released in LangChain? So LangChain, if you're not familiar, as we wait for this to load, so it's a new framework that you can use on the back end to tie your LLM into a whole host of services and build your own solutions on how you want to interact with these LLMs, whether it's browse the internet or have a conversation with your files. I've done a handful of videos on this. I'll put a couple links in the description and maybe pin them on the video here that you can take a look at if you're curious. But this was something that I did earlier just to get a sense on, okay, a little bit more advanced, maybe not advanced of a prompt, still pretty simple what I'm asking, but it's a bit more involved than just saying, here's the weather, here's a couple details about the weather. And so while that's loading on my right side, I'm just going to show one thing on my left here that I do think is a nice feature, but not something that I've noticed as consistent, at least not yet. And that's that it actually has this annotation for the link. So there are references when it gives you information back from crawling the web. So instead of worrying whether there's a hallucination there from the LLM, it will give you that reference. So I think this is pretty interesting because with these models, knowing that hallucinations are a problem, being able to have a reference for maybe material that an LLM is, sort of quote, less certain about, it could try and make an attempt to validate that with information on the internet. But I mean, maybe not, right? Because, information on the internet is not always true itself, but at least having that reference will or could help, I should say. So the other thing here, and this is a good demonstration of this, is sometimes it just doesn't finish. It looks like it's loading, so the loading spinner is there. But if you notice that these refresh buttons, as soon as that stop icon goes away, this is just done. So I'm going to have to ask this again. So that's one thing with the alpha version. It's not as polished as ChatGPT. It does give you that feel very much of like, this is like an alpha version. Like it's like you're like an internal company user of this product, where it's, you sort of get a sense on where it's going. You can give feedback like I'm doing right now, but you sort of know what you're in for. Like, this isn't, like I'd expect a polished version of this. If it was, it'd be released to everyone right now. So if I just go ahead and save and submit, let's just see, give it another opportunity here. So LangChain new features. And so a different result. So that's another thing too. Similar to LLMs, it's not going to consistently give you or perform the same question the same way. So this is actually what I would hope or would have hoped in the first example that it would have done, is actually go straight to either the documentation or their website to try and get information on the releases, because that is probably better than just trying to Google or Bing. I'm not quite sure what they're using on the back end to search. I might assume that it'd probably be Bing with their ties to Microsoft and all. Let's just see what happens here. So you'll see, okay, it will go in and out of pages. It sort of works like AutoGPT or Baby AGI, except it's more likely to give you a response. If you've used Baby AGI or AutoGPT, you'll know that sometimes it will just keep running and just create like these recursive loops of doing all these tasks. You might ask it the weather, and it will start giving you like the history on the Eiffel Tower or what have you. So very, very early for some of these tools. But again, similar to AutoGPT or Baby AGI, you sort of know what you're getting into. These are tools that are literally weeks old. In the case of this feature, this web browsing feature, I bet you even internally within OpenAI, it's within the past number of months, certainly not years. They've been working on this. So we'll keep letting this run here on this tab. But while this is going, actually we see this one also stopped. So we can sort of see, I like to look through the pages and sort of get a sense on like, what is it doing? Like, is it continually going to the same page? Like that, for instance, I feel like, that could be a condition potentially programmed in. I'm not sure what they're using to browse the web. Like I noticed, I see like you see that they're clicking on things, they're scrolling things. So I'd imagine maybe something like Selenium or Puppeteer, but it would be curious to know how they're doing this and maybe just setting in some base conditions like don't visit the same page, like store these things in a vector. Just save them in memory for this session while the user's going through it, and don't continually go to the same pages again and again, because you see here, it hit the same page at least 5 times here. So, like I mentioned, so I'm just going to go in and refresh this tab here. I'm going to go in and close some tabs as well. And what I'm going to be doing here is just quickly showing you the code interpreter. So you've probably noticed, or maybe you have, maybe haven't noticed some examples of this already. Now, the interesting thing with this is what some users, or at least what I didn't see at first, is that you can actually upload files. So you can upload something like a CSV. Now this code interpreter is using Python. I did ask on Twitter and did not get a response on whether they'd consider putting in a V8 engine where it could please Node developers, JavaScript developers like myself to be able to generate Node.js code and interpret it on the fly would be pretty amazing. But nonetheless, Python is obviously the larger. So Python's obviously the larger group within machine learning, at least in terms of the programming language that's used. So it's completely understandable why they went this route. But so one thing with this, you can upload files, and it's not the Python file per se that you're uploading, is you could upload a CSV of data, for instance. So if I just go ahead and upload, so I have some of my YouTube data here. So none of this data is a secret by any means. I started on YouTube a handful of months ago. I'm still a relatively small creator, as you see. So if I just upload some of this data, I didn't get a comprehensive data set. I could certainly make this data set quite a bit bigger in terms of what I exported from the YouTube analytics page. But just to give you a bit of a reference, so if I go ahead and upload this file, now one thing to note with this, which is pretty cool, is you can upload files that have a huge context. So I've seen examples of people use like a 20-some megabyte file, whereas if you tried to paste in a 20 megabyte file into the context window or send that to the API for GPT-4 or what have you, that's going to be way more tokens than can be what is handled. So this is interesting where it's like, say you have a large set of data and you really wish you could just throw it within ChatGPT and get some answers. This sort of will take a look at the data, look at the structure, and then think of solutions on how to parse it. So do you want to make a chart? Do you want to create like a correlation coefficient or whatever you want to do? So, okay, so you'll see once I uploaded here, you'll see, okay, so it says, let's get started by loading the CSV data and start taking a look at its contents. I'll use the pandas libraries to do this. So the pandas is what like a data scientist would use, for instance. So you see, okay, this CSV contains data about various videos, information, title, publish time, etc. Let's get a better understanding of the data, how many rows, etc. So it's starting to sort of infer, how it's going to, or how you might want to use it, and also how it's thinking on how it's going to use it. And then from there, once the data is loaded in there, you can do things like create novel charts and provide any insights you might have from this data. So you can see, like, by creating charts like on the fly and having a Python interpreter, like, you can really have limited or no coding experience and be able to come up with solutions that could have otherwise taken a programmer or a data scientist to develop. So, and the nice thing with it is it will show you its work. So if you're new to programming, you can certainly use a tool like ChatGPT or a GPT based model to help you with learning. And the nice thing with this is it's showing you its work. Is you can always take this code and run it locally if you want as well. So if it really does like a bang up job of what you're trying to do, you can save that down, store it, and save it for later. So you see this is sort of working in the background, and here we still don't have an answer for our simple LangChain question. So like I said, I just wanted to give sort of a raw example. So if you are really eager to use this, I just be patient, don't worry too much about it. It's still very, very early. You might not find it as useful in its current state as you might think it is in a lot of these polished Twitter examples you see. I'm sure a lot of those polished examples are running into this, the same friction that I am, where things just don't work, or you have to, spend a lot more time than simply doing a Google search for something. So if I just head back over here, you'll see, okay, so it started to go through creating what I asked for. So some novel insights on my data. So a bar chart showing the top 10 videos with the highest average percentage viewed, I assume what it was saying. So a scatter plot showing the relationship between the number of views. So the histogram. Okay, so let's just sort of see what it has here. So we'll see that here we have the top 10 views with the highest view percentage. So the interesting part with these is, so a lot of these with the really high view percentages, now these are YouTube shorts, which I did when I initially started my channel, but I haven't done for quite some time. So the thing with shorts is they can have an average view percentage over 100. So if you're not familiar with YouTube and how it works on the back end, you might see this and say, well, this data can't be right. Like there's things over 200% here. But the reason why this is important is because the way that this works, or maybe not important, but why I should point this out is once a user gets to 100%, they might have rewatched it once. So on average, this video is viewed twice. And this is, a video down below here, it might be viewed all the way through and then some on average. So then another interesting insight, okay, so the relationship between views and impression click-through rate. So this is something that I've heard like huge, and like the biggest YouTubers will do is really dive into the data analytics. Like a creator like Mr. Beast is sort of notorious for creating insights based on his data and really trying to refine everything. Like, what's a good length for a title, or what's the color tones you should use on a thumbnail, etc., and so on. So going through this, it sort of gives you a really quick ability as a creator to leverage, what you might have, like I mentioned, otherwise needed a data scientist for. So, and then also, okay, let's see what else it came up with. So distribution of watch time hours for all videos. So yeah, so this is my watch time. They're just trying to see what's going on here. So the frequency, I'm actually not sure what's going on here, but if it is the watch time of my video, so I have one video that's like the vast majority of my watch time hours. So it's my GitHub Copilot rather in 7 minutes. and it is something like 1,500 watch hours. So that's my one video that really just took off for my channel so far. So you can say, you get a bit of a rundown on what it's doing here, but I could just go back here, and I only provided it like a basic example of a CSV. There's not many columns in that CSV. I think there's less than 10 columns in the one I uploaded, but you could add all sorts of data analytics that YouTube provides and really dive into maybe how you could optimize videos if you wanted. So, maybe I'll give GPT-4 one last chance, and then I'll just quickly run through, while I'm doing that, some of the new plugins that were just released, I believe yesterday. Some of the third-party plugins, I should say. So let's think of one more example. So research some of the trending libraries on GitHub right now. So I did do a prompt like this earlier where I asked specifically what libraries are trending within AI, and it really had a hard time with it. So similar to that LangChain example, that was actually the example where it was like scrolling, it just went on and then stopped. I tried it a couple times, it didn't work. But something like this, I would expect it to be able to figure this out. So it will be interesting to see when they start to roll this out, or whether this is a focus internally for them on like refining sort of how it interacts with Selenium or Puppeteer or whatever they're using to query the internet. Maybe they're using some other library or something they built themselves to do so, but there really seems to be, in my opinion, there is a fair bit of work there to really refine this and polish it up for the broader release. But pretty exciting. Some of the examples, when I have got it to work, it can be pretty helpful, but I think the hit rate, it's like probably under, I don't want to be too harsh, but I also want to be honest, is probably under 15% right now. Like there's a lot of just like frustrating instances like this, where you're saying, either there's too many requests, or it just stops and it doesn't really give you the insight that it stopped. But yeah, so I'm going to leave the GPT-4 for now, and I'm just going to hop over to the plugins. So plugins is also in alpha. There are some third-party plugins that they have released. There's more and more coming. I'd imagine this will just start to fill up. So Zillow is new, Tasty Recipes. Now these are always like to each their own. Some are going to be more relevant to others, or some than others rather. I thought it was interesting, even Lowe's, like a company like Lowe's saw the value in putting their plugin within the ecosystem. So I'm going to wrap it here. If you have any questions, or if you have any examples that you want me to do, I might do a follow-up video in a number of weeks, seeing the state of this, how it's progressed, how it's improved. Maybe give you more, hopefully more examples where it is a bit more impressive with the browsing. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments, things you want to see, prompts you'd like to experiment with. If you don't have access to it yet, I'll happily throw in some prompts that you're interested in seeing, and include them in a future video. So hopefully you like this. If you did, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And until the next one.